Welcome to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. If you want control of your finances and a strong return, don't contribute to retirement plans like 401ks, even a case for not contributing in the dollar per dollar employer match, but rather just walking away completely. Then we drill down on how you can obtain the coveted real estate professional designation with a great guest today on Get Rich Education. Finally, with Total Control Financial, get checkbook control of your existing 401k and IRA funds to invest in real estate. Yes, you can move your retirement money into your own checking account, but you must avoid the little-known tax that you'll get hammered with in a self-directed IRA. Instead, start your QRP. Learn more and get your free copy of the QRP book by text messaging QRP in all capital letters to 72,000. The company that's provided our listeners with more loans than anyone is Ridge Lending Group, NMLS 42056. You can finance more than 10 single families up to fourplexes. Serving most U.S. states, their knowledge and experience leads to your financial freedom. They're number one in the investment space. Pre-qualify and then chat with President Chaley Ridge personally. Start on your next investment property loan right now at ridgelendinggroup.com.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Hey, you're inside GRE from Timișoara, Romania to Thimphu, Bhutan, and across 188 nations worldwide. I'm Keith Weinhold. This is Get Rich Education. I have a dreamy proposal for you, and you're going to love thinking about this. Imagine you are gifted your entire life's earnings all at once. And you know, I think most people underestimate their earning potential throughout their lifetime, especially if you listen and apply what we talk about here. This means that you are delivered, say, $8.5 million, your entire lifetime's earnings, all at one time. Well, wouldn't that feel incredible? What would you do with this $8.5 million? Quit your job? Hopefully you'd even take the time to give your 2 weeks notice. Go book an around-the-world trip with your spouse? Donate insanely to Habitat for Humanity? Whatever it is, wouldn't that feel amazing? But wait, there's one catch. I'm sorry, you got ahead of yourself. I didn't say when you're delivered this lump sum of $8.5 million, your entire life's earnings. You need to stop dreaming because the timing of this payout is on the very last day of your life. Only then do you get the $8.5 million, that last day of your life. Well, that's awful timing. You don't like that deal at all. There's no more around-the-world trip. Plus, you'd be deferring your salary until the last day of your life in this sort of weird parallel universe. In fact, with this windfall that you only get on the last day of your life, you don't even have any time to enjoy it. You're stressing that it just gets inherited how you really intend it to. Well, okay, that's a ridiculous extreme example. All right, then I'll get more rational with you. Look, instead, on the day that you were born, what if you were told that you would be delivered 70% of your entire life's earnings when you're age 70? That still doesn't sound very good. The average American male life expectancy is only 78. What are you going to do with a lump sum of 70% of your entire life's earnings that isn't even released to you until age 70? How much are you going to be able to enjoy your life in your 70s? Well, you don't really know, and this sounds pretty limiting. This would be a big risk and an awful idea to only get access to 70% of your life's earnings at age 70? Well, why am I saying all this stuff? What am I telling you this for? Well, see, this 70-70 thing is just about what many people set their lives up for that contribute to traditional retirement plans. Things like a 401k, 403b, thrift savings plans, an IRA, a a 457 plan, which I'll just collectively refer to as 401ks hereafter for simplicity. So my point is that it's not just the amount of lifetime income and earnings that you enjoy, it's the timing. That timing really matters. Look, I used to contribute to a plan that set me up for just this kind of life. I used to contribute to a 401k plan when I worked for an employer until I realized that it's basically a life deferral plan, like I just described, more than it is a tax deferral plan. The tax advantages break down in the plans anyway, and your real rate of return is often about zero. 401k participation is a claim. It's like a marker for a life of financial mediocrity. Look, anywhere in life, you can't do what the masses do and then somehow expect an extraordinary result from that. You don't eat kettle chips and animal crackers and use white flour processed food to snack your way to developing an 8-pack of abs. You don't learn a new language by taking a lot of naps, and you don't obtain financial freedom when you're still young enough to enjoy it through funneling your money into your 401k. In fact, doing that robs you of that opportunity. Exactly. That's all stuff that the masses do, and every one of those things yield a poor outcome. In life, drifting into something or defaulting into something just because other lazy people around you are doing it, that usually does not turn out well. Now, pensions, where your employer used to pay you a defined benefit, that's something that's largely being phased out in the world today. Now, a lot of people don't realize that 401ks, which behave oppositely, where your benefit is based mostly on your own contribution, they were only invented in the late 1970s, and employers really didn't start adopting them en masse until the 1980s. Well, now look at the symptom. This is why we have such a retirement crisis today. Defined contribution plans like 401ks, they've been active for more than a generation now, and we see the result. Close to 8 in 10 people have a woefully inadequate financial retirement plan. In fact, you'll remember when we had the father of the 401k, yes, the man that actually invented the 401k plan, here on the show with us a year and a half ago. His name is Ted Benna, Benna. And when he was here, he corroborated the fact that when 401ks were rolled out, they were called salary reduction plans, but that name sounded so awful to potential participants that they had to scrap that name in order to foster some participation from America's employees. But see, a salary reduction is still principally what the plans do to you. You've taken a voluntary pay cut. And on that episode, when he was here, Ted Benna also pointed out that the plan's administrative fees used to be paid by employers, your boss, and then that shifted to employees, you, when the plans moved to something called bundling in the early 1980s. The fees got bundled together and then paid by you. In fact, you might remember that I asked Ted Benna, who do 401ks benefit more with what they've turned into today? Do they principally benefit Wall Street or the plan participants?
Unfortunately, it's benefited Wall Street to a much greater extent than it should have. You know, the mutual fund industry, to pick on them specifically, they were mom and pop businesses, a few relatively small mutual fund companies before 401k. 401k made that industry what it is today.
That turned everyday people into de facto Wall Street investors.
Absolutely, whether good or bad.
Now, the 401k inventor didn't completely rip what the plans have turned into on that show, but they aren't what he originally intended, and they aren't enough to retire on alone. In fact, Ted and I did agree on that episode that 401ks aren't completely bad. If you're a person that has zero self-discipline and you are instead going to take your discretionary income and bet it all on the Cleveland Browns winning the Super Bowl or allocate it all into Connecticut lottery tickets, well, then a forced savings plan might save those types of people, because that's better than squandering your income and retiring pitifully. But even Ted Benna said he favors real estate when he was here on that show, and that real estate is, in fact, his biggest asset class. Yes, we're talking about the guy that invented the 401k plan. If you want to listen to he and I's conversation, by the way, it is on Get Rich Education episode 197. When I was last in Pennsylvania 4 months ago, which is where Ted Benna lives, we tried to meet, but our schedules didn't quite match up. I did have a great face-to-face chat with his son, Steve Benna, then. But let me ask you, would you rather have your money controlled by a government plan or by you? With retirement plans, you are subject to the government's contribution limits, and they control the tax rate that you'll eventually have to pay on your 401k come retirement time for you. Down the road, you must pay tax when you take 401k distributions in retirement, and they are taxed at ordinary income tax rates, and those rates are currently about twice of what capital gains tax rates are. So in fact, you'd be taxed at a lower rate if those funds were outside of a designated retirement plan. More important than the taxes, though, is that 401k returns don't even perform well compared to carefully bought real estate. We've talked about that on the show before. There's a largely mythical notion that retirement plans are the best place in the entire world to put your money. Contribute the maximum if you can. That's actually what some people say. If you do this, note that then you're not liquid for opportunities. You're not liquid for emergencies. You must pick from your employer's limited investment choices. If you want to pull out contributed funds before retirement, you must then pay the tax and a 10% penalty. I think it's a little more palatable for you to pull it out if you think of it as a fee rather than a penalty, by the way. So taxes aren't avoided, they're deferred, and they're fully taxable later. See, shortly after 401ks came out, tax rates were high back then. When you were putting money in, you got the tax deduction on the high side then, and when you took it out, you were taxed on the low side. Then they were lower in retirement, so it worked somewhat better for that group of people. Today, most people think tax rates are going higher in the future, so if you contribute now to get tax deferral, you'll be paying more in tax when you take the contribution at retirement. If you try to circumvent this and say you'll have a lower income in retirement because you'll be in a lower tax bracket, then that is an awful goal. You did not plan for prosperity at all. That would mean that you have less income in your retirement years than you do in your working years. Do you want to effectively sell your time when you're age 30 just to buy that time back when you're age 70? Well, that's what you're doing with a retirement plan. Well, an hour of your youth could be worth more to you than an elderly hour. Today, our regular contributor here, Tom Wheelwright, and I are going to discuss this more. We're also going to discuss the real estate professional designation. And what is it? If you, as a real estate investor, don't have sufficient passive income to offset your passive losses, then the excess losses cannot be used currently as a tax deduction for you. And instead, this potential deduction is carried forward to future years. But there's an exception to this rule if you qualify as a real estate professional. See, you'd rather show the IRS losses now so that you get your deductions now and get a refund now. And that way you can recirculate more dollars back into real estate or whatever else now, rather than maybe getting them later. In life, do you want to get paid now or do you want to get paid later? Maybe. Hey, it's a bit like the 401k in that way, where I started the show with the $8.5 million example. Before we bring in Tom, I just want to remind you that I am truly grateful for your listenership. I really mean it. I would not have a show if it weren't for you. Get Rich Education is here in its 6th year of production, and I've been told and shown that the show has nearly 50% more listeners than just 1 year ago, which is amazing to me, and I'm devoted to bringing you the best content that I possibly can every week, and even bringing you the world's most prominent guests that you like to hear from so much. And expect more of this as we have some terrific new guests coming onto the show in the future, as well as the return of some of your real estate, finance, and investing heroes, like the return of Chris Martinson here early in the year. Speaking of those heroes, let's catch up with a familiar one today. I'd like to welcome back the most recurrent guest in Get Rich Education history. In fact, I've lost count with how many times he's been here. He's a CPA and author. He's also the founder and CEO of Wealth Ability. Welcome back to the show, Tom Wheelwright.
Good to be here, Keith. Always good to be here.
Tom, tax strategy and wealth strategy, I kind of think of them as intersecting with the 401k. Someone that has a W-2 job and a 401k plan, I think even those that are somewhat enlightened with real estate investing, oftentimes they think, well, maybe I'll just contribute into my 401k up to the point where I get $1 per dollar match from my employer because that's a really good deal. That's like free money. And then anything above and beyond that, maybe I'll invest in real estate or some other sort of real asset. But you have stated before that even with a one-to-one match, it's often not worth an employee participating to a 401k to that extent. Can you tell us more about that?
First of all, remember that there's an old saying, a niche will make you rich. And we've heard it more recently in Malcolm Gladwell's book called Outliers, that if you really want to be one of the best at what you do, then at a minimum, you have to be at 10,000 hours. And they've actually discovered that masters of a skill set, it requires 60,000 hours. You're not going to do that on a lot of different things in your lifetime, not unless you live till you're 500 years old, right?
Yeah.
So here's the thing. If you get really good at one thing, that's where you're going to be the most successful. And we know that when it comes to our job or business or even being a good person. What we typically don't look at is how does that apply to investing? So what happens is people decide, well, I'm going to do a little bit of real estate and a little bit of the stock market and a little bit of oil and gas. And, I'm going to kind of dabble. Well, if you dabble, you get dribbles when it comes to returns, right? You just don't get really good returns. Or you have to get lucky to get good returns, right? Or it's just gambling. What I find is the people who really go all in to one type of investing are the most successful, and they're wildly successful. So if you want to get really good at real estate, you can't be dabbling in the stock market. You want to get really good at real estate, which means you probably want to invest your money into real estate. So my question is, why would you put it into a 401k where it's going to do nothing compared to what your real estate is going to do? Let's say that you do get a match, but remember, the value of that match diminishes over time. I mean, think about it. After 1 year, the value of that match is now 50% of what it was the first year. We think, well, that's 100% return on my investment. Yeah, in the first year, but the second year, it's only 50% return. The third year, it's now a 33% return. The fourth year, it's a 25% return. And if you go 30 years, that match only increases your return by 1%. It's just not as big a number as you think it is. You go, yeah, but I'm getting a match every year. Okay, that's great. And you may want to do that. That's fine. It's just that if you really want to be focused on one area and really get your money's worth, I would be really looking at real estate. Here's the other thing. You get a match in your 401k, guess what? That match is going to be taxable. You're just postponing the tax on that.
Right.
You're going to be taxed on that. You're going to give a good portion of that back to the government. You say, well, and here's the argument always, Keith, is, well, I'm not going to have as high a tax liability when I retire. Well, the only way that ever works is if you retire poor.
Right. And who would plan for that?
Why are you planning? By doing a 401k, you are planning to retire poor, by definition, because there's just no way you're going to have enough money in that 401k to live the way you're living now. If that's what you want to do, that's fine, but I suspect that's not really who your listeners are, Keith. So I suspect your listeners really want to retire rich. And if you want to retire rich, guess what? With real estate, you never have to pay tax. So you get the tax benefits now, and you never have to pay them down the road with good tax representation. With a 401k, you're always going to pay tax, and you're going to pay it at the highest rates because when you retire, guess what? You're not going to have your business deductions. You're not going to have a lot of the deductions that you had while you were working. So now you're actually in a higher tax bracket. Plus what you're doing, remember, you're investing in the stock market. Normally, if you invest in the stock market outside of a 401k, you're going to pick up dividends and you're going to pick up long-term capital gain. And that's going to be taxed at a 50% of the ordinary tax rates. If you do it inside a 401k, it's going to be taxed at 100%. So you're actually doubling your tax liability by investing within a 401k. So you may say, yes, I'm getting a match. At the same time, you're giving up a lot of tax on the back end.
Oh, I think there's just so much that can be said about this most interesting subject. I mean, the word diversification itself has supporters and detractors. I mean, there's something to be said for being in a number of different things and being spread across asset classes, if you will. But I think kind of like you're saying, Tom, there's something else to be said for, in general, people really get ahead in this day and age when they're specialists rather than generalists.
Yeah. Here's what happened. Diversification is the most misunderstood term in all of finance. The whole point of diversification is to not lose money. That is the single goal of diversification. Ask Warren Buffett. Single goal of diversification is to not lose money. If that is your goal, is purely to not lose money, you should diversify, but you should probably get out of real estate. Because if you want to be in real estate, you ought to be in there because you want to make money. You don't want to just not lose money. What happens with diversification is there's a time, once you reach a certain level of wealth, you absolutely want to diversify because you don't want to lose the money. While you're building your wealth, you do not want to diversify. I know that's contrary to everything you've been taught in school and finance classes and everything else. I'm just telling you, if you look at the wealthiest people on earth, not one of them built their wealth diversifying. Not Steve Jobs, not Bill Gates, not Elon Musk, not one of those people diversified. They took one area, even taking Elon Musk. Okay, well, he's in space and he's in batteries, in solar. No, they're all the same thing. Elon Musk is in energy. That's what he's in. He's in renewable energy. He uses that energy for rockets. He's going to use that energy for cars, and he stores that energy in batteries. He's very, very focused. If you look at any of these people who made billions and billions of dollars, every one of them did it specializing. Not one of them did it as a generalist. Not one. Henry Ford didn't do it invest in the stock market. He did it building production cars. So it doesn't matter. Walt Disney did it with Disneyland entertainment industry. It was all one specialty. And so if you want to do average returns, diversify. If you want to do higher than average returns, specialize.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting way to say it. When you're young and when you're building wealth, that tends to lean more toward specializing. And when you're older and you have wealth to protect, that tilts more toward diversification than it does when you're young. I think there are a few other components about the 401k, and this can get a little bit philosophical, but I mean, it just cannot be understated that you just simply don't get any current benefit for putting $1 into a 401k, even if it's from an employer match. You often don't feel the real benefit of that, the true benefit of getting the income for decades. But when you know about cash flowing real estate, you can realize a benefit both today and tomorrow. So you're not opting into what I like to call a life deferral plan, which is what a 401k really is. And that is just huge.
That's a good point. You know, the other thing is that remember that your risk goes up as you lose control over your assets. The less control you have, the more risk you have. And nowhere do you have less control than a 401k. Nowhere. Except maybe a 529 plan, which is, by the way, the only thing worse than a 401k is a 529 plan. Instead, why don't you take control of the asset? If you want to see what does the government really want you to do, see where the tax benefits are. Yes, you get some tax benefit for a 401k, but it's not nearly the tax benefit that you get investing in real estate or other productive assets like energy or business.
Right. Like me, who's legally never paid capital gains tax on my real estate my entire life, but I have been enjoying the cash flow to create a better lifestyle. I mean, you can't put a price on that.
You can't. I mean, think about the lack of control on a 401k. You don't control how much you put in. You don't get to control when you take it out. You don't get to control what you invest in, and you don't get to control what tax you pay. Okay, the government controls all of it. And if you want the government to control your life, this probably isn't the right show for you. And And I hope that's okay me saying that, Keith. But the reality is this is a show about taking control of your money.
It is.
And if you don't want to take control of your money, you should be in a 401k. If you want to take control of your money, you might want to consider, boy, maybe I really ought to consider specializing and not being subject to government control on every dollar I invest.
Not to mention 401ks typically offer that investor a suite of pretty lousy retail mutual fund choices, and often one doesn't realize how low their true rate of return is after they consider the deleterious effects of inflation and emotion and taxes and fees and volatility on that rate that they think they're getting from their 401k invested in a mutual fund.
Right. The average rate of return in the U.S. is 3%. That's the average rate of return. So that doesn't even keep up with inflation. So
enough said. Tom and I have more to discuss, including how can you get the real estate professional designation and who cannot be a real estate professional. That's a substantial tax benefit. You're listening to Get Rich Education. Our guest is Tom Wheelwright. More when we come back. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold.
Since 2014, the powerful Get Rich Education podcast has created more passive income for people than nearly any other show in the world. This show teaches you how to earn strong returns from passive real estate investing in the best markets without losing your time being a flipper or landlord. Show host Keith Weinhold writes for both Forbes and Rich Dad Advisors and delivers a new show every week. Since 2014, there's been millions of listener downloads in 188 world nations. He has A-list show guests include top-selling personal finance author Robert Kiyosaki. Get Rich Education can be heard on every podcast platform, plus it has its own dedicated Apple and Android listener phone apps. Build wealth on the go with the Get Rich Education podcast. Sign up now for the Get Rich Education podcast or visit GetRichEducation.com.
Countless property investors get killed with maintenance costs, but that's far less likely when you buy brand new construction. Let me tell you about JWB Real Estate Capital in Jacksonville, Florida. They pioneered the build-to-rent model where you can invest in new construction, turnkey rental properties. That's why JWB was featured on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. To learn more and see inventory, go to newconstructionturnkey.com.
This is Rich Dad Advisor Ken McElroy. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold and don't quit your daydream.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education. We're talking with Tom Wheelwright of Wealthability. Learn more about him at wealthability.com. Tom, one of the more common questions I get is about the real estate professional designation and how does one get it? And I think first one needs to understand that to get the real estate professional designation, which assists you terrifically with taxes, it can almost feel like a windfall, is that you don't need to be a real estate agent or take any sort of certification course. And I think most of you listeners understand that. Joseph is a listener that came to our Tampa real estate field trip, and he specifically wanted me to ask you, Tom, a question the next time I had you on the show. And he really wanted to have you discuss more in depth about how to participate in getting that real estate professional designation while you're still earning an active income at your job, and if that's possible. And I know about this and the rules about it. And I mean, frankly, I did not win the real estate professional designation until I quit my day job. I think it's really difficult to have an active income and get that designation. So tell us more about the possibility of working a day job and having that real estate professional designation at the same time. Is that plausible?
Let's remind everybody why this is important. So remember that now we have bonus depreciation on real estate. So we're going to get a big loss the first year we put our investment real estate into service. We buy it, we put it into service. And that big loss we'd like to use now. We don't want to use it down the road. We want to use it now because we want the cash back from our tax refund. We want that money to go into more real estate. So the rule is that investment real estate is generally considered to be passive, which means that if there's a loss, it's a passive loss, and that loss can only offset passive income until you sell the property in a taxable transaction. So that means that, let's say you get a $100,000 loss from this property, you may not be able to take that because you may not have passive income. Now, I want to talk about how to create passive income, but let's say you don't have any passive income. All you have is income from your job.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that loss is just going to carry over forever until you actually sell the property. So the way out of that And interestingly enough, I don't know if you know this, Keith, but this was a law passed in 1986, but we didn't get the real estate professional status until several years later. And it was lobbying by real estate professionals, actually like Donald Trump, like it or not. He was one of those that was lobbying. This is your business. What if this is what you do? It makes no sense. It would be considered to be passive loss. So instead, what they did was they put in this real estate professional designation, and it's a bright line test, meaning if you meet this test, it's no longer passive. That's what it means. So real estate professional has two rules. One is you have to spend more than 750 hours a year in real estate. Well, that's 15 hours a week. That's not that hard. But two, you have to spend more time on your real estate than you do all your other business or job activities combined. And so that's why it's very difficult if you have a full-time JOB to be a real estate professional. However, there's a little opportunity here if you're married and your spouse doesn't work full-time.
Yeah, and that was one of Joseph's particular questions. Joseph has a spouse, a wife that does not have an active income and works on their properties locally, and they're interested in getting that designation.
Yeah, so if you're married and you file a joint return, then only one of you has to be a real estate professional. Now, it's only your hours that count, right? You don't get to count you and your spouse together, right? So one of your spouses must qualify independently for that real estate professional. Now, I do get the question all the time, do I need to get a real estate license? And the answer is technically no. I will tell you, it helps. And where it helps is on audit. Because if you're a real estate agent or a real estate broker, and as long as you work for yourself, you can't be an employee somewhere. As long as you have your own agency, you're a subcontractor and you own your own business, then it does help because it is an indication that you're serious about real estate. And so I do encourage people, first of all, because it reduces the commissions you have to pay when you buy that property. And second of all, because it actually does look better to the IRS. So while it's not technically required, it's helpful, I think. That's how you can have a real estate professional. Only one of you has to meet it. Now, you still have to meet the test of are you actively involved in all of the property. So there's an election you have to make on your tax return. It's called a 469C7 election. So a 469C7 election is one that says, we're going to group all of our properties together and consider them a single property. And if we do that, then we shouldn't have any problem. But if we don't do that, we may meet the real estate professional test and still have passive losses. So it's very important that your tax preparer make that election on your tax return. And that's an election you should be making every single year.
Yeah, that is an election I make every single year. It's one form that would fit on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and it's a box I check and something I sign each year to, help certify in the IRS's eyes that I am indeed a real estate professional. I do more activities with real estate investing each week than I do anything else, and it's more than 750 hours a year. I've heard you bring up the phrase active involvement a few times with getting the real estate professional designation. What constitutes active involvement?
Well, it means that you're more than just an investor, okay? It's more than just a passive investor. In other words, for example, take myself. I'm not a real estate professional. I am probably never going to be a real estate professional. And the reason is because I invest in real estate. Yeah, I invest in a lot of syndications. And as an investor in a syndication, I'm not going to be a real estate professional. On the other hand, if I have my own properties that I'm actively involved, either I manage them or I'm a contractor or I do the subcontracting work or anything in that nature, then I'm going to be actively involved in that actual day-to-day operation of the real estate and not merely an investor. Now, your investment hours count as long as you also participate, right, actively in the management of your property. So you just have to have some combination and it needs to reach that 750 hours. And by the way, I always suggest get over 800 hours because if you're at 751, the first thing the IRS is going to do is come in and say, those 2 hours don't count. Now you're at 749, you don't qualify. And you're keeping a log, make sure you keep track of that. Make sure you keep track of those hours and make sure you have more than enough hours.
These are some great takeaways here. So in aiding in getting the real estate professional designation, which is where you need to have 750 annual hours of active involvement, and it's also got to be your principal activity. But some things that help you in defense of an audit are having a real estate license, although it's not a necessity, keeping a log, and probably helps to show that you have 800 or more hours.
One of the big questions I get is, what if neither my wife nor I can be a real estate professional? How do I get to use my losses currently? I get this question all the time because my wife and I both are full-time CPAs. We're not real estate professionals, and I have a lot of real estate. I'm going, how do I get the benefit of these losses? Well, here's the thing. Remember, passive losses are deductible. They're just not deductible against active income. They're deductible against passive income. So that means that you need to make sure that some of your income or all of your income is passive. Well, how do you do that? Well, if you have a business, let's take you, Keith. Let's say that you could not be a real estate professional. You have a business that includes all of your marketing and podcasting, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. That could be a passive business if you didn't own it. What if your kids owned that? Well, now your kids would probably be passive because they're young. So you have young children owning that, and then you might own it through a trust or some way legally to make sure they own it. But then have them also own through that same trust, have them own your real estate. Well, okay, now they're passive in the real estate and they're also passive in the business. Therefore, passive losses offset passive income. Now, you have to have good tax representation to do this, both on the accounting side and on the legal side. It's just something that is just not that hard to do. It's a matter of doing some changes in ownership. And with a big gift tax exemption right now, nobody should have an issue from a gift or estate tax issue. And by the way, we get estate tax benefits by doing this. So this is what we call a tax strategy. And while it's not that get out of jail free card the real estate professional is, I'll tell you what, it's absolutely doable. I do it. My clients do it. And what we're looking for is we're just looking for how do we create passive income instead of having all of our income be active and all of our losses be passive.
Yeah, there's a lot of strategy that goes into it. Before we leave the real estate professional designation subject, who cannot be a real estate professional?
There's nobody who can't be. I mean, literally, let me give you an example. There's a court case where a nurse who had a full-time nursing job was able to prove she spent more time on real estate than she did a nursing job. Now, she lost the case because she didn't make the election we talked about. So she worked 2,000 hours in a nursing job, and she proved that she worked 2,200 hours in real estate. So anybody can do it. Not everybody wants to do it. Everybody can do it.
That's pretty remarkable. Well, while we're here still at the beginning of a relatively new year and people think about new systems for tracking and itemizing their taxes, is there any favorite phone app that you can suggest for doing things like storing receipt images or tracking mileage?
I have good news for you. In 2020, Wealthability will be releasing its own set of apps, its own suite of apps to handle all sorts of stuff like phone tracking, real estate professional, mileage logs, all of that kind of stuff.
That's great. It's an app world. Everyone's on their phone these days. Well, Tom's got some awfully innovative strategies for helping you reduce your tax burden permanently. And, he always stays on the right side of the law with this. So, Tom, tell our listeners how they can learn more about you.
Yeah, we call it legal, ethical, and moral. Don't do anything illegal, unethical, or immoral, and you'll be good. Everything we want to do is legal, ethical, and moral. Just go to wealthability.com, and it'll come up with a button right away. And in that button in the top right-hand corner, you can schedule a call, and we are happy to help any way we can. We have over 25 members of our Wealthability Network, which means 25 accounting firms throughout the U.S., and we're growing every day, and we don't charge a dime for getting you with the right tax advisor. So make sure you have the right tax advisor, because that's the way you always are able to pay the least amount of taxes legally possible.
It's life's greatest expense, and this is how you can permanently reduce it. Tom, it's been valuable as always. Thanks for coming back onto the show.
Thanks for having me, Keith.
Always great hearing from Tom. Maybe you have even more questions about the Real Estate Pro, like does reading property management statements and handling your properties remotely count as active participation or not? That's when you can look up Tom. Now, if you're losing half of your discretionary income to gambling and you're not contributing to your 401k, then 401k involvement up to the match might be all right. But our typical listener is not the profligate sports gambler. Retirement plans are for a life of financial mediocrity and for life deferral. Maybe the most underrated word in the entire investing world is the word timing, and the power and the options of having both cash and especially cash flow today. Really, after today, when it comes to the way that you think about your retirement plan, what more do you want? I covered the mindset part of it in some of the numbers. We had sort of the disembodied voice of Ted Benna here, the inventor of the plan himself, which was from back in episode 197, discussing the 401k's operation. And then Tom Wheelwright on the tax angle and some mindset too. In fact, maybe the cherry that I can add on top here is that when I had a day job, if I had plowed all of my discretionary income into retirement plans, then you never would have heard of me. I would still be a job worker. Until next week, when I'll be back to help you build your wealth for today, not just tomorrow maybe, I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.